The bulk of the readings this week are from War and Genocide. This material provides a solid foundation for studying the rise of National Socialism, how its leaders cemented power in Germany, and it introduces us to a number of victim groups that were targeted for persecution. Now, without doing a précis of the first four chapters, I do want to reiterate the four claims that Bergen lists in her introduction. Number one, the Holocaust was an event of global proportions with worldwide repercussions. Number two, the Holocaust happened step by step, gradually over time. Number three, the Holocaust needs to be understood in the context of World War II. And number four, Jews were the primary targets of Nazi destruction, but their fates were linked to other victim groups, for example, Roma and Sinti, the disabled, Soviet POWs, Polish elites, and homosexual men. Keeping these 4 points in mind as we go through this course will help to contextualize some of the other material we will be covering, as well as provide important insights into how and why the Holocaust unfolded differently in different parts of Europe and in North Africa. Another point that I want to draw your attention to is the use of photographs in Bergen's text. Traditionally, many historians have used photos to back up or emphasize a specific point they may be making. Bergen, however, belongs to the generation of historians who remind us that photographs also tell their own story, and that they need to be carefully and thoughtfully examined. On pages 7 to 11, she offers some useful insights into how to work with historical photographs in academic research and writing. And I hope you will discover, as Bergen writes on page 11, that in studying the Holocaust, photographs offer a powerful way to open up new questions, even if they don't always answer them. Often the study of the Holocaust leads to many more questions than it answers, and that's fine. It challenges us to look deeper into the material we are using and encourages us to look at these events through different lenses of academic inquiry. In Chapter 1, Dry Timber, Bergen delves into the complex questions of how the Holocaust was possible. Why were non-Jews also victimized, and why did it originate in Germany? These are, of course, complicated questions, but you'll quickly notice that Bergen challenges us to look deeper into the historical context and the traditional arguments frequently cited for the rise of National Socialism. Indeed, anti-Semitism was a major force in the Holocaust, but it was not the only factor. The diversity of Jewish life in Germany and in Europe ranged from secular to highly acculturated expressions of Judaism to traditional orthodoxy. And yet, antipathy towards Jews and Judaism certainly predated National Socialism, just as prejudice against the disabled, the Roma, and homosexuals had a long history on European soil. In this chapter, I also want to draw your attention to Bergen's analysis of the impact of World War I on Germany, as it is frequently cited as a main reason for the rise of National Socialism. However, Bergen challenges this notion and on page 42 writes, World War I did not cause Nazism or World War II in such direct ways. Its impact was both less obvious and more insidious. Here, two important issues are raised. The first is the climate of scapegoating that arose in Germany that accompanied its refusal to accept the reality of military defeat. And the second was the devaluing or cheapening of human life. Bergen is careful not to make a direct link between World War I and World War II, but she does note the consequence of a society that has shown human life to be cheap and expendable when she writes, World War I did not lead inevitably to the rise of Nazism, the outbreak of World War II, or the Holocaust. However, the massive legacy of death and suffering it left behind did constitute one of the preconditions that made possible an unprecedented explosion of violence just 2 decades later. As I've already said, the introduction and Chapter 1 provide important contextual information as to how and why the Holocaust unfolded as it did in Germany. Chapter 2 provides insight into the particular ideology of German Nazism. As noted on page 54, Hitler was able to draw upon old existing forms of anti-Semitism, but was also able to shape it into something new by attaching an idealistic goal to it. The renowned Holocaust scholar Saul Friedlander described this as redemptive anti-Semitism, meaning that for Hitler and National Socialism, anti-Semitism was something that could be invoked to explain everything that was wrong in society or in the world, while offering a form of redemption for the adherents of National Socialism. Here, too, we must not underestimate the use of propaganda by the Nazis to disseminate their positions and to shape public opinion. This chapter also goes on to discuss the role Goebbels played as chief propagandist for the National Socialist Party. But if you have time, I encourage you to watch at least some segments of 2 videos I've included in the optional viewing folder. Both are by Leni Riefenstahl, who had the dubious honor of being Hitler's favorite filmmaker, and who was an astute, skilled filmmaker, invented new camera filming and editing techniques that defined her work. These 2 films are so carefully and skillfully crafted that they present viewers with images of a new, reinvigorated Germany that is triumphant and bold, and in doing so provides viewers with a glimpse of how the idealized German society could be, providing a visual construct to the goal of redemptive anti-Semitism. This visual imagery is often referred to as soft propaganda because instead of invoking anti-Semitic caricatures or imagery, it imagines a society where the only people in it are those who belong to the same racial community, the Volksgemeinschaft of the Nazi imagination. I would also encourage you to intersperse your readings with the excerpts of survivor testimony that are in the required viewing folder. There are 3 for this week. One from Vera Schiff, describing how life changed in Prague once it was occupied by the Nazis. One from Rose Rushin, who describes how her school life changed and how she was able to leave Germany. And the third from Edith Hamburger, who described the arrival of the German troops in Austria. I always teach with testimony because I believe it's important to always be aware of how these events affected individuals and families, and to discover what choices people were faced with and how they made these very often difficult and heartbreaking decisions described in their oral histories. I'm also aware that oral histories may not always be 100% historically accurate, but they do offer us insight into what these experiences meant to the narrator, how they processed them, and how it has affected their life. I find the testimony of Edith Hamburger particularly interesting in this regard, as she, it seems to me, relays the story of the German troops arriving in Austria with an anger that is seething just below the surface of her narration. Her description of Kurt Schuschnigg resigning on the radio is particularly compelling. She says he had a gun to his head, and this is certainly true metaphorically, but I have not been able to confirm that comment from a historical perspective. And perhaps it's not necessary to do so. As Dory Lobb, the psychoanalyst who started the Fortunoff Archive of Survivor Testimonies at Yale University, stated, what is important about such testimonies and descriptions is that the event was so dramatic, so monumental in the life of this person, that this is how she remembers it. And I think you may agree that the Anschluss as described by Edith Hamburger was so egregious, it really did destroy her world. Now, interestingly, Schuschnigg was arrested by the Gestapo. He was sent to the Dachau concentration camp and was liberated by U.S. forces and immigrated to the U.S. He died in 1977 in Austria. However, these testimony excerpts, I believe, are pivotal for our understanding the Holocaust as something perpetrated by human beings against other human beings, and for showing us how individuals responded by putting a face to history. In Chapter 3, titled From Revolution to Routine, Bergen covers the years 1933 to 1938 in Germany and the shift that took place within the Nazi Party as it moved from being an outsider revolutionary force to that of the government of power, and finally how it consolidated its control over various institutions. Now, several important themes emerge in this chapter. One of the most important that is woven throughout is the establishing of, or defining of, who will be in and who will be outside of the new national community, the Volksgemeinschaft, that National Socialism seeks to construct. First, the attack on German Jews is detailed on pages 76 to 80, and then we learn that other groups follow. The disabled on pages 80 to 82, Germans of African descent, page 75. And an image begins to emerge as to who is going to be left out or even removed from the society being constructed and with whom power will reside. Another theme evident in this chapter are the measures by which the Nazi leadership consolidated power, not only in Germany itself, but also within the Nazi Party. The account of the Night of Long Knives on pages 88 to 90 is particularly telling in the lengths the leadership went to in order to exert control over all factions or potentially rival leaders of the party, as well as in various institutions and governmental systems. The third important theme in this chapter is how everyday life changed for those being targeted by the Nazis as well as for non-Jewish Germans. In the concluding paragraph of Chapter 3, Bergen notes that at a certain point, Nazism becomes in a sense normalized as people accepted what was happening around them. They accepted the changes and in many cases accepted the advantages that came with, if not endorsing the Nazi Party, them remaining silent and not directly opposing it. This analysis of the normalization of Nazism as part of accepted daily life is particularly haunting, and perhaps even foreshadows what is to come. Bergen notes, in early 1938, however, most Germans were not thinking about challenging Nazi rule. It was just one of millions of ordinary people who, for all kinds of ordinary reasons, endorsed and accepted a brutal system. She writes this on page 100. This gradual cementing of control, of keeping the support of the population and the Nazification of various institutions invariably changed German society and made National Socialism an integral part of normal, everyday life in Germany. This is not only a succinct description and interpretation of the events, but it's an important indicator of how much things had actually changed in Germany. Chapter 4 covers quite specifically the period of 1938 to 1939, which is characterized by open aggression against the perceived enemies of the Reich. The annexation of Austria in March 1938 is followed by the Sudetenland crisis of September 1938, and the German occupation of the remainder of the Czech lands in March 1939, together represents the Nazis' attempt to bring German-speaking lands together under one new German empire. So we have, in a sense, a pushing of geographical boundaries of the German Reich, justified by a pan-German ideology which sought to unite all German-speaking lands under one leader and one leadership. Now, Nazism frequently sought to justify this expansionist ideology by saying that the German speakers in these lands were being mistreated or abused, and the only way to ensure their security was to bring them all together under the leadership of German National Socialism. The second example of aggression is an internal one, when the German state turned on its own Jewish citizens. In November 1938, a wave of violent anti-Semitic attacks and pogroms are carried out against Jews in Germany, Austria, and the occupied Sudetenland. In this increasingly volatile and violent German Reich, Jews faced an increasingly precarious existence and fewer options of escape. Bergen ends this chapter by examining some of the few, if not risky, options available to Jews. We are reminded here that if the Evian Conference sent a message to the Nazis that the world was not concerned about the fate of persecuted Jewry, this was confirmed by the ill-fated voyage of the St. Louis. The Kindertransport program brought a spark of hope to some, but it also demonstrated the fear and the danger of the era when Jewish parents were faced with making the heart-wrenching decision to send their child or children away to an unknown future in a distant land with people they did not know. Although the Kindertransport program saved some 10,000 Jewish children from certain death, it also tore the fabric of Jewish families apart, as desperate Jewish parents often sent their children away, fearing that they would likely never see them again. And indeed, most parents did not survive the Nazi assault upon them. To supplement the account of the Anschluss, I've added in readings from Doron Rabinovitch's book, Eichmann's Jews. It is an in-depth, detailed account of the consequences of the Anschluss upon the Jews of Austria. It offers us a nuanced understanding, not only of the conditions in Austria that welcomed the arrival of the German troops, but the painstaking manner in which the Jewish community tried to deal with the new reality of life under the Nazi regime, how they tried to exert agency whenever and wherever they could, the choices they faced, and the enormous challenges they were up against. Try viewing the two archival videos on the Anschluss after reading the section by Rabinovitch. It provides an informative visual account of the atmosphere and the events he describes. Now, we have the advantage of being able to look back at the Anschluss from the vantage point of today, knowing everything the Jews of Austria were up against. But Rabinovitch captures this sense of desperateness of the era in his writing, the sense that Austrian Jews and their community representatives had to act in order to save themselves without realizing how bad things were about to get. His detailed descriptions of how the Austrian Jewish community organization tried under unrelenting circumstances to improve daily life for Austrian Jews while trying to secure exit permits and save Jewish lives is a remarkable account of how quickly the Nazification process was in place and the conditions Austrian Jews endured. I realize that this week is one of the heavier weeks of reading and viewing material, but it is important as it provides us with the foundation upon which the following weeks is built as we cover the various regions, countries, and experiences of those directly affected by National Socialism. I'd like to end the discussion on the readings with a contemporary connection. And this is an optional component of the course. You have a lot of material to cover this week, but if you are interested in looking at the ongoing reverberations of the Holocaust in Austria, you might like to check out the video of Hannah Lessing, which is in the Reading Room folder. Austria has struggled to deal with its National Socialist past and came to this internal struggle with its past much later than Germany. In this video, Hannah discusses the challenges of her work as Secretary General of the National Fund of the Republic of Austria, mandated to provide a measure of restitution to those who survived the National Socialist agenda. Again, this is an optional component, and I include it because I like to conclude presentations with a contemporary connection, and also to provide you with some information about how the Holocaust continues to affect societies and countries around the world.